Okay folks, well welcome back to the channel. Now we are continuing with the recommissioning of the 1956 Standard 8. Now I think I left it waiting for the last video rather, I think I left that waiting for the new brake shoes to arrive, and they have come and I have now fitted those. So there are new cylinders and there are new shoes, or reconditioned shoes on each side at the front, so that's all good. The back end is okay. Now I've started re-bleeding it and brake fluid started flying out of the, what's that there for? Let's move that out of the way. The brake fluid started flying out of a pipe here, so I had to remake this pipe. I was able to reuse the unions on either end, but the pipe itself sprung a leak and it was spraying brake fluid out of here, so that sort of slowed me down for a couple of hours while I made up a new pipe and sussed that all out. So that's all back together. Like I say, new shoes, new cylinders, and the brakes are all bled up. So next it was the tyres. Now I checked, and the PCD of the standard wheels, i.e. the dimensions around here, the stud pattern, is I think 3 3/4 inches, which is the same as the Herald that came later, and the Spitfire and so on. So I bought a set of wheels off a Spitfire. They're actually, those are 4.5s, and that's 5J, i.e. the width of the rim, but with good tyres on. And I thought, oh, I'll just use those for now, I'll put those straight on the car, and these fitted on. But when you put these on, I'll just show you, these wheels will fit on the studs here, but when you try and turn the steering wheel, the inner edge of the rim clobbers the suspension there. So the offset, i.e. how much of the width of the wheel is inboard of the mounting as opposed to outboard, is different on the Herald and Spitfire wheels compared to the standard 10. So be careful if you're trying to put different wheels on your standard 8 or standard 10, because they might not fit. They might go on, but as soon as you steer, then you hit problems. So bear that in mind. So these wheels can go, but they were worth buying just for these tyres, which I've had fitted this morning. I've just been to go and pick these up. So these are good. They're only 2 or 3 years old, these tyres, and they will do the trick just perfectly. So I need to put those on, and once they're back on, the standard can come back off the jacks and back on the floor, and I can just drive it around a bit and just test the brakes, make sure they're bedded in okay and they don't need re-bleeding. But I think the signs are they are okay. So that's where we're up to on the standard 8. Inside, just a little minor change. I changed this mirror. The original one, someone had actually stuck a larger piece of mirror glass on the original mirror, and it had razor sharp edges, which wasn't very good. I mean, it's not ideal in the best of times, but I found this one in the box which has got rounded off edges, properly finished off. So I'll put that on, and that'll just be a little bit better. Doors are all shutting nicely, so then it can go back on its wheels, and there are just a few more setup jobs to do. I don't think it's charging the battery properly, so I need to have a look at the dynamo and the regulator and the connections and so on. So that's probably the next thing to do once the wheels are back on. As I think I mentioned in the previous video where I introduced the little standard, these sills have been replaced, but they're not quite the right shape. They're a little bit too deep. I mean, you wouldn't really know, but it's only because I've had them before that I know that. So at some point in future, if everything goes to plan and the car goes back on the road, etc., I might look at replacing the sills. So if anyone watching this has any new unused sills for a standard 8 or 10, I know it's fairly unlikely, but if you've got any sat in your garage not doing anything, please let me know, because I'd quite like to have those in stock just in case. In fact, any body panels that you've got for a standard 8 that are in good condition might be handy to have in if they're not too pricey. I don't really need any panels, but it can be nice just to have a couple in, maybe some better wings. Possibly these have gone a bit frilly at the bottom. So yeah, if you've got any bits like that, but sills are the main thing. I wouldn't mind finding better ones for. Please let me know. Well, a couple of weeks have passed, and where are we up to with the 1956 Standard 8? Well, you may have noticed there are a few little stick-on additions. Now, me and my youthful assistant, we've been having a bit of fun with this one, because it's meant to be a fun little car. And the look we're going to go for with the Standard is to have it looking like a car of the mid-1960s that's fallen into an enthusiast's hands. And the inspiration for this is if we have a look in some of these magazines like Car and Car Conversions, Hot Car, that kind of thing. And here, and every month or every week, you'd get readers writing in, sending photographs of their modified and updated cars. You get extra lamps, a few stickers, like this Austin Devon here. You've got a few extra period accessories, extra gauges, switches, all that kind of thing. A bit like this A40 over here. So what's this, 1967 car mechanics, as you can see. All the extra lamps, racy wing mirrors, all this kind of thing, fancy wheel trims, and so on. Extra switches on the dashboard. So that is kind of the inspiration for what we're going to do with the standard. Nothing that's irreversible, no V8s, anything like that. But just to have a bit of fun and make it look like an enthusiast car, maybe a first car would have done for a new motorist back, say in the 1960s, when the cars, these sort of cars were, 10, 12 years old, that kind of thing. And there we go, so that's the plan anyway with the look of it. But to more important matters now, I think I did the last video and I was talking about the fact that it wasn't charging the battery at all. The charging light was staying on all the time. So that's kind of a quick look under the bonnet, and I can talk a little bit more about what I've been doing under there. So the first thing I did was take apart the dynamo. Now I've got the old dynamo in here. We can just have a quick look at that. I've actually left it in pieces here. Now I took it to pieces, but I didn't have a very close look at the armature which goes inside the casing there. I've removed them now, but this is the back piece that goes on there, and in here sit the brushes that sit on here that run on the commutator. So anyway, I put new brushes on it, but that didn't make any difference at all. When I actually had a closer look, I'm not sure if you can see this, there's a break in the wiring just there. And overall, the dynamo was looking fairly old and fairly worn out, so I thought, well, this needs to be reliable. So I don't want to messing around having to take the dynamo off every 5 minutes just to sort of keep it going. So I bought another dynamo, which is on the car. There we go. That's on there. I also replaced the fan belt, put all that back together, and no difference. I was still getting the ignition light was stuck on all the time. So the next thing to check was the regulator. Now, I cleaned up the points as best I could in the original regulator, but that didn't make any difference, so I had to buy a new one of these. Now I also did check for continuity, because there are two connections between the voltage regulator and the dynamo. You've got the D and the F. The F is the field and the D, I think, is the power to the dynamo. So you check for continuity between the two just to make sure that they're okay, and I did actually replace the connector on there because that was looking a bit dodgy. And I put the new regulator on, and lo and behold, it now works correctly. The charging light goes out as soon as you rev it up on startup, which is exactly how it should be. So that was quite a good result. At least fitting new parts, you'd hope they'll last for a few years before they cause any problems, because like I say, the whole idea is for this little car to be a reliable runaround, and all weathers runaround. It's not immaculate by any means, but it's just presentable. And that's the whole idea with this one, is just to have a bit of fun. I haven't wired up the fog lights yet, but they're proper 1950s Lucas lamps. They're not in perfect condition, but the rest of the car isn't either, so they look just about right. So we're actually getting terrifyingly close to being more or less ready for the road. The brakes still need a bit of a further adjustment. Just to recap, it's had new shoes on the front and wheel cylinders. I have played it all through and adjusted it, but I think they still need doing because the pedal is a little bit long. It doesn't pump up, so I don't think there's any air in the system, but I just think I'll go around and just adjust the brakes up at each wheel again. That's a fairly easy job to do, just a little adjusters on the back plates, and that's quite a simple job. What else? I can't think of anything else at the moment that needs doing. It was the charging system was the biggie, really. The idle is about right, it seems to run okay. I still haven't changed the gasket on the exhaust and the inlet manifolds here, so that still looks a bit rubbish. So that's a job to do. And I also need to set the tappets, because there's one of the tappets is a little bit noisy on it, so I think we'll do that before we do too many miles. Otherwise, it's looking pretty good. Now I must also say a quick hats off to DVLA, because I forgot to send off the logbook for a couple of weeks, so I sent it away, and the new logbook came back within about a week, which, given, you know, many of the DVLA people are still working from home and backlogs and delays and everything, I was really surprised about that. So fair dues, they got the new logbook back to me within a week, so that's that done. So at least I can tax it when the time comes to put it on the road. It just needs to be insured, and I can tax it, 0 rate of course, and then we can give it a bit of a test run and see what it's like to actually drive, because obviously I've moved it up and down the drive, but I haven't done any more than that. So that is more or less where we're up to with the standard so far. Very, very close to a first test run down the road. That reminds me, actually, I need to get my youthful assistant to crack on with actually cleaning the car up. We did make a start on polishing it, cutting back the dead paint, which was a bit patchy in places. He did make a start on that, but there's still more to do. So I think we'll get him a bucket and a sponge, and he can crack on with just cleaning it all up a bit, finish off the polishing that he started a little while back, but somehow hasn't managed to complete yet. Aintree Grand Prix 1957. Of course the car's 1956, so that's pretty much in keeping, like I say. Inspired by Car and Car Conversions and Hot Rod magazine and all these, or Hot Car rather, magazine back in the day. It's all locked. Yeah. I've seen photos of cars, standards that have been used for rallying in the 1950s, club rallies, that kind of thing. And they look really good, so that's the look that we're going to go for with this one. I'm going to get one of those rear mounted spot lamps to go on the back, just like this sort of the rally cars did back in the day. They look quite good. So I've got a spare one of these panels, so I don't need to cut up this or drill rather this panel. I've got a spare one which is a bit tattier, but that can go on, and then I can mount a nice old Lucas lamp on the back of there, and that can act as a reverse light, which will just look the part on this old car. An incredible thing is happening. Sneak up on him quietly. This is not something you see very often.
Excuse me?
I was just saying how often you like cleaning cars.
I was just saying how often you pay me for doing these things.
I don't need to pay you.
Payment needed.
I don't need to pay you. It's the enjoyment. I've always maintained that if you really want to understand what these cars were like back in the day, you could do a lot worse than just pick up a few of these old magazines. They cost, you know, £1 or £2 each, but they're just packed with information on how to run these cars and how people did run them back when they were just cheap second-hand cars. Look at this. The same chap, actually, this guy here working on his Morris Minor, and here fiddling with the brakes on his Austin A40. Very useful. But yeah, these magazines, they're just invaluable. I always think they're way more interesting than modern classic car magazines, because a lot of it is people's experiences of and working with problems and fixing problems back when these cars were sort of just cheap runarounds. I just think they're really good. You know, can we help you? Back in the day, people would actually write in if they had a problem with their car. They would write a letter to these magazines, and then they'd wait patiently, hoping that next week or next month even, the letter would be published and they might get an answer to their problem. Then they could try and fix their car, and in the meantime their car would just be laid up. So it's incredible. Whereas now you just go online, go onto a forum or whatever group that's relevant to the car you've got, post a question, and you usually get an answer fairly quickly. But in these days you would write a letter. Like here, I've just bought a 1956 Vauxhall Wyvern. The engine and the interior are perfect, but the bodywork is a bit tatty. What year is this? This is 1967, so the car was 11 years old. I've filled the holes with fiberglass. Could you give me some details on how to hand paint the body, such as paint thinners, brushes, etc.? The car still has the original cellulose. This is Mr. Wilkes embarking. So he would have written that letter, and then he just goes back home, away back from the post office after posting his away, and he just waits patiently, hoping they'll get some information back from the contributors to this particular magazine. It's a very different world to the one we're in today. But yeah, if you really want to understand what these cars were like to own once they got a few miles under their wheels, you could do a lot worse than just pick up a few of these old magazines. I mean, they're a great read in their own right, but you know, you get proper hints and tips on some of the foibles specific to these cars of the 1950s and the 1960s. Excellent stuff. Stop that piston slap. Article here on better bodywork, how to use filler. Great stuff. Now, until now, of course, I've been assuming that everyone knows what a standard 8 is. Not everyone does though, so I just thought I'd have a quick recap of the history of these particular cars. Now, these were introduced in the early 1950s. The standard 8 has an 803cc 4-cylinder engine, and then the standard 10 came along, and that was 948cc. So like Austin and BMC, you had the A30, which was 803cc, same as this, or the A35, which came later, 948cc, just like the standard 10. Now, I have done a brochure review before on the standard 8s and 10s, so I won't go into too much detail here, but I'll include a link at the end of this video to the ones that I did on the standard 8 brochures. But we'll just have a quick look just to see what standard we're offering in the early 1950s. Now, the very first cars were different to these 8s. The very first standard 8s had sliding door windows front and rear. They didn't have bumper overriders. They were very, very basic, very standard cars. They didn't even have chrome hubcaps. They just had bare wheels. They were that basic. But by the time of this car, I mean, this is a 1956, things had come on a little bit, but you still didn't have an opening boot lid. If you have a look at the back here, there is no opening boot lid. You get in via the rear seats that fold down. This here is just a removable hatch. It allows you to have access to the spare wheel. But anyway, back to the old paperwork. Now, this is a brochure for the standard Super 8 and the Family 8. The Family 8 was a slightly more basic version, but you know, we're splitting hairs here. There's not a huge difference between the two. This one is dated, this brochure, 1955. If we have a look in here, I mean, I love these old brochures. They're so nicely illustrated. They're just fantastic. Just look at that. The standard 8 models represent a major achievement in the realms of popular motoring. Now known as the Family 8 and Super 8 saloons, they include in their equipment wind-up windows, no draft ventilation, trimmed door panels, press door button handles, self-cancelling flashing type direction indicators, 2 screen wiper blades, and hub cover plates, i.e. hubcaps. That was a big deal in 1956 or thereabouts. We've got a few more illustrations of the interior. Slightly small people. One of the things with the advertising back in the 1950s, it was so common to sort of see very small proportion people in huge cars. I mean, you'd think that was probably a big old Rover or something like that, not a compact 4-door saloon. All the standard 8s and 10s were 4 doors, even the Estates. The companion estate car was a 4-door, and those are a great little car. I used to have one of those. Let's see if we can... It's not so easy to flick through these single-handedly. There's a bit of work going on next door, which is just perfect. There we go. There's the engine. The 803cc 4-cylinder engine. That was stretched and enlarged. It became 948cc for the standard 10, and 1147 in some of the Heralds, 1296 in the Herald 1360 in the Spitfires, and then 1490 something in the last Spitfires and midget 1500s. So this engine was a very adaptable, very tunable engine. There's just a bit of specification about the cars, but I think they're really nice little cars. There we go. The Family 8 Saloon. The standard 10 was just a slightly plusher version. It had a bit more chrome. Now mine's got a chrome front piece on it, but I think originally it would have been like that, with just a plain front panel. But the 10 was just slightly more expensive, slightly plusher, but you know, nothing great by any stretch of the imagination. But the main benefit was it had the 948cc engine rather than the 803. But otherwise, they were all pretty similar, to be honest. 4-speed gearbox, floor change, and so on. There's the companion estate car that I was talking about. These are really nice. I had one of those for a few years. There we go. I'll certainly have another one of those again. If I saw one of those for sale, I'd be very tempted with another companion. 4 doors, really good little cars they are. This is just a little leaflet for the stand drive 2-pedal transmission. Now, one of the standard 10 saloons that I used to run, EF 439, that was a 1957 Super 10 Deluxe, and it had the stand drive 2-pedal system. And basically it meant you couldn't stall it. It was a great, and the clutch was on a button on the gear lever. So to change gear from like first to second as you're driving along, you just back off the throttle, press the gear lever button down, change into second gear and let go of the button. That re-engages drive and off you go. When you're in traffic, you just leave it in first gear and then you can just brake, accelerate, and you don't have to sort of put it into neutral or press a clutch because there's no clutch. Just, you know, it's just a very, very clever system. I think BMC had the Manumatic or something like that, a very similar system. There you go, there's the... So as you change gear, you press the clutch or actuate the clutch via the little button on the top of the gear lever. It's a really good system, that was. There aren't that many cars still running with it on. Obviously it adds a bit of extra complexity, but when it's working right, as it did on my car, it's a really cool thing. Newton drive patents. Anyway, that was just a quick potted history of the Standard 8s and the Standard 10s. Like I say, I'll include links to the full brochure reviews at the end of this particular video, but for now, I just need to crack on with getting this little car back on the road. I'm not sure when it was last on the road, probably within the last few years or so, but there's a surprising number of jobs it needed doing before it could really, realistically be used. I think it had been laid up for a while, which is why the brakes weren't very good at all. I mean, I bled up the front brakes, as I've said, and as I was bleeding it, one of the pipes burst, so I had to take it all apart again and make up a new pipe. So, it's not been without its little issues, and getting the charging to work properly did take a little while and a fair bit of head scratching, but I got there in the end. It was really strange because when I fitted a new regulator and I went to test it, it wouldn't start at all. The ignition light didn't come on at all. And what had happened is I disturbed the connections on the regulator to fit the new one and swap the connections over, and in so doing, one of the connections had actually broken up because the wire was quite old and the connection was quite old, so I had to remake that piece of wire. But with that done, it started up instantly and was good to go. So it's just one of the sort of trials and tribulations of recommissioning a car that hasn't seen a great deal of use. Anyway, that's just a quick update, a brief update on where I'm up to with the Standard 8. I'll carry on plugging away at it, making sure it's as reliable as it can be, and hopefully soon we'll be able to taxi and get it on the road and then just try it out on a few local hops and see where we're up to. So I'm going to call this video to a close now, and I'll come back with another update as soon as some more news on the Standard 8 project.